Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John. And today we're going to be doing something a little different, something in a similar vein to our Halloween special. Today, Brittany and I are going to have a relatively off-the-cuff conversation about the Netflix documentary, The Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker. We're looking to test out some varied content, which we hope will keep things fresh for you, while also giving you more of our authentic selves.
Don't worry though, our coverage of unsolved cases won't be going anywhere. That will always be our main form of content. But if you just can't seem to get enough true crime content and are on the hunt for another podcast to add to your rotation, check out our friend Dawn's show, Method and Madness.
Looking for compassionate true crime? This is Method and Madness, a true crime podcast with a purpose. Shedding light on injustice and advocating for change. Join me, Dawn, as I take you on a journey of immersive storytelling and pose questions to get you to think about the method of the mind, the madness that ensues. We're going deep into the evidence, examining lesser-known cases, all while focusing on the victims and the survivors. Dive in to Method and Madness, available wherever you get your podcasts.
We met Dawn at True Crime Podcast Festival in Dallas last year. She's such a nice, genuine person who puts a lot of effort into her content.
She really is. But now, back to what you're all here for. Let's chat about Kai, the Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker. So to preface everything in hopes of giving you a basic guideline to follow along, especially if you haven't watched the documentary yet, I want to start off with a brief synopsis of this whole thing. In early 2013 in California, a vagabond going by the name Kai was involved in a critical incident in which he thwarted another man's attack on the public. Shortly after the incident, Kai was interviewed by a local news station, and that interview ended up going viral. From that day forward, Kai's life changed. The documentary chronicles the days and months after the initial interview and tells the story utilizing commentary from various people Kai came into contact with during that time. There's a lot of different characters, and the documentary itself jumps around a bit sporadically at times, so our conversation will probably do the same. So if you want to get the most out of this episode, we recommend watching the documentary either before or after listening. But either way, even without any knowledge of what we're talking about, our conversation is bound to highlight a number of issues we're sure you have opinions on. All right, so today, let's dive in. We have the Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker, which I still think is hard to say.
Yes.
I still want to say the Hatchet Wielding Hamburglar.
Yes, and he's not a hamburglar.
No. So we were browsing Netflix. We came onto this documentary, and I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And I got to say, like, I think I'm somebody that's usually up on memes and stuff like that. And this whole thing took place probably 2013, I think.
Yep.
And I have no recollection of this guy Kai whatsoever.
Me either. Zero.
So we'll kind of go through, I guess, the events of the documentary, give our thoughts on it, and then kind of talk about some of the things that were left out of the documentary that we think could have elevated its final score.
Yeah, and kind of provided more context. And, you know, I feel like this is kind of, in a way, marketed as a true crime documentary. And it kind of appeared to me anyway, like a lot of that aspect to things was kind of kept out. And that's like one of the things that I think we're going to, you know, dive into more as we talk about it.
So in the documentary, starts off with what we kind of sectioned off as the interview. So in February of 2013, there's this guy that's alleged to, you know, just go crazy in his car, drives his car straight into a bunch of utility workers and traps a guy like against another vehicle. And then this operator gets out of the car and then starts bear hugging this lady. And out of nowhere, this hero, this savior, this hatchet-wielding hitchhiker
Yep.
comes out of nowhere and bashes this assailant
In the head.
In the head. Like, when I thought about it, I was like, there's no way this guy lived.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I feel like the first 30, 40 minutes of this whole thing, I kept saying to myself, like, oh my God, he killed a guy.
And how is he out free?
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, nope, he actually survives. So if you guys are watching this at all and you're anything like me, I either wasn't paying enough attention or it wasn't like fully explained up front.
I don't think it was, because I was there with you. I was paying attention. And, you know, when you hit somebody with a hatchet 3 times, you assume that they're probably going to die, especially when you're hitting them in the head.
Yes.
But it's revealed later on in the documentary, not to jump ahead, but Kai, also known as Caleb Lawrence McGilvery.
Well, I would say he's more so also known as Kai, and his legal name is Caleb McGilvery, but...
Sure. You know, you say tomato, I say tomato. But, I mean, this guy was known as Kai Lawrence more so than Caleb Lawrence McGilvery.
But legally...
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking
Caleb. For. So we'll call him Kai, just because that's what he's referred to most of the time throughout the documentary.
Yep, just to make it easy.
So I guess in order to stop this guy, he came over, he smashed him, you know, with the... I guess more the handle side, like the reverse side.
Yeah, like the butt of the hatchet, I think is what they called it.
Like the hatchet was facing the wrong way, essentially. Yes, like he was still holding the handle.
Not the sharp part.
Right. Until the 3rd strike, and then he hit him in the head with the blade on the 3rd strike.
Correct. And I do just actually want to give everybody a warning now. If you are squeamish like I am, there is a portion of this documentary that shows the injuries that the driver of the vehicle sustained from Kai hitting him. And woof, they are not easy to look at.
I would say the head wound surprisingly wasn't that bad.
No, but there's something going on with his finger that genuinely made me sick to my stomach.
It was like it was filleted or something. It was gross. So
so just a heads up that there is at least 1 to 2 scenes in this that show some
gore,
kind of grossy gore stuff. I don't do gore, so.
Yep. So Kai thwarts the attack from this other assailant, and the interview happens.
Yes.
It turns out that for some reason, Kai only wanted to talk to this guy, Jessup, from, I think it was like KMPH News or something like that. And it's just such a bizarre interview. Like, this guy just essentially... not mauled a guy with a hatchet, but he just beat a guy with a hatchet who's probably severely injured now. And Kai is just readily accessible to the news outlets to give this interview. Like, he's not with police. He's not being questioned. He's not detained to figure out what's going on.
Very, very bizarre.
And, I mean, there are just some indicators, in my opinion, that Kai is unwell or mentally unstable from the get-go during this interview. There's pretty much no remorse shown. Obviously, you want to stop somebody from doing something bad, but, you know, most people will have, you know, some feeling of remorse for what they had to do to stop that threat.
Yes, I agree.
And nothing is really shown here.
Yeah, so I do just want to say, too, before we continue talking about the interview, we will put in the snippet of the interview that essentially went viral. And, you know, he starts out this whole thing, like, before he even explains what he did, you know, giving this really... essentially like sweet message to anybody listening to say like, you're a good person no matter what you've done, da 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 da. So we'll play that now so you guys have full context of like what's said.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about?
What happened today?
Well, went straight out of Dogtown, skateboarding, surfing it up. Before I say anything else, I want to say no matter what you've done, you deserve respect. Even if you make mistakes, you're lovable. And it doesn't matter your look, skills, or age, or size, or anything. You're worthwhile. No one could ever take that away from you. Now, this stuff right here, I was driving and I was in the passenger side of this f***er's car, and he comes over on there. He was over by the recycling center. He says, "Oh, when I was in the Virgin Islands, 30 years old on a business trip, I this 14-year-old." I was like, "You what?" He's like, "I raped this 14-year-old." Starts crying, gives me a big hug. He's like 300-pound guy. I'm like, "Oh shit, you must be f***ed, man. Like, what's he talking about?" I didn't take him seriously at first. He comes driving down this way. He's like, "You know what? I come to realize I'm Jesus Christ, and I can do anything I f***ing want to." And watch this, bam, and he smashed into this f***ing guy right there, pinned him in between that f***ing truck. And so I hop out, I look over, the guy's pinned there. I mean, like, freight train riders know this. Like, if you get pinned between something, do not f***ing move that shit, otherwise you bleed out. Like, motherfucker, I ran in, I grabbed the keys, he's f***ing sitting there like nothing even happened. And like, f***ing, like, man, if you started driving that car around again, man, there would have been a hell of a lot of bodies around here. I hop on out, and so I grabbed the bag, I threw it over by that hole right there, and then f***ing buddy gets out, and these two women are trying to help him. He runs up and he grabs one of them, man. Like, a guy that big can snap a woman's neck like a pencil stick. So I f***ing ran up behind him with a hatchet, smash, smash, smash.
So the interview happens. Jessup and his cameraman, leave after the fact. Kai goes on his way. And later that night, it's said that, Jessup was like, oh, let's just throw this up on the internet. We're going to throw the whole interview up on the internet.
Yeah, it's like a almost 6-minute long full interview with him.
And I guess the next day, everyone's, Jessup, the cameraman, and Kai, their lives all essentially start on this trajectory of whatever this documentary is.
Yes.
It's bizarre.
It's wild. And I think it was like 500,000 views
overnight.
Essentially overnight. And
off of like a nobody YouTube channel.
Yeah, but
like the guy said he had 20 subscribers, and then all of a sudden, boom, 500,000 views on the video.
Yeah, and the thing that's wild, too, is that Jessup was, like, brand new at this job. This was, like, his first interview out in the world doing this. So it's just crazy, like, how this happened and how it all became, this big thing.
And that could have been a benefit for him because Kai didn't want to talk to anybody else after him. So whatever Jessup's demeanor was, Kai kind of resonated with that, and he really played up what happened. Like, he became like an actor in that interview. He was like with the whole smash, smash, smash thing.
Yeah, the smash, smash, smash is like what seemed to be, at least to me, what made it go so viral. Because then all of a sudden you've got memes, you've got videos, you've got people making songs out of
Auto-tune
what.
and stuff.
Yeah. So, I think people really honed in on not only his, nice message that he essentially started it out with, but also that particular comment, the
craziness of the story in general.
Yeah, like the way he looks, his hand movements, the whole thing. And I feel like that is just like what really stood out to people and why it went viral.
Yep. So the video goes viral, and now you have all of these media people trying to find Kai. And the only person that has any type of contact information for Kai is Jessup. Now, there's a portion of the documentary where it really goes into, trying to build up Kai as this marketable guy. Like, everybody's always looking for the next best thing or the next big thing.
But also that he's this hero.
Right.
After committing a very violent act in a heroic way, yes, but I think so many people were blinded by certain aspects of this interview that they're kind of not really realizing that yes, he's a hero. He may have saved someone, but he also almost bludgeoned somebody to death.
Right.
So, and didn't appear to have remorse like John had mentioned before.
Yeah. So, he's being portrayed as this hero and everybody wants to get in contact with him, but Jessup's the only one that can. So he has all these executives reaching out to him, trying to get a hold of him, whatever. And then Jessup finally gets a hold of Kai and then re-interviews him. They spend like a few hours together, I think is what it seemed like.
Yeah.
Kai brings him to a music store where he plays, he plays the guitar and sings a song and stuff. So now they have all this additional footage being like, oh, we have, this homeless, nomadic kid, young, he's charismatic, and he was involved in this crazy ordeal. And then now look at him, like, he can perform, he can sing, he can play the guitar. And they're like, oh, we got to get this guy his own TV show. We got to get this guy on all these interview platforms. We got to get him on Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Yep.
So then you have these like reality TV, what would you call it?
Producers, I would say.
Producers, brand managers, stuff like that.
Yeah.
All trying to get their hands on him. And up to this point, I have to say that nobody in this documentary comes off as having any type of ability to gauge somebody's moral character or...
I was going to say to suss out bullshit or like,
It's like
just...
They were all blinded by the pursuit of, being the one to make Kai blow up into this sensation.
Yeah.
And then kind of reaping the monetary benefit and the clout associated with that.
But in reality, that's already been done. Jessup did that.
Jessup did that, but once somebody else can like get a hold of him and then, be like, oh, I'm going to offer you this deal and stuff like that, then
we're
it's
going to get you on TV. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. It's, this whole big thing. And I just have to say, too, obviously you can't see us while we were sitting here watching this documentary, but I would say probably by 10 minutes in, John had this face on of... I don't believe a single freaking word from this kid's mouth. Like, he was just like, why are these people believing? Not even believing, but like, why is everyone so honed in on this kid being a hero and him being so great? And they're likening him to the double rainbow guy, and they're doing all this, and they're like, he's such a hero, he's so amazing. And
he's
John's
so marketable.
Like, he's not well.
Right.
He's not well. And it was so painfully obvious to both of us, but John was like really honed in on it immediately. And, you know, you have all these producers, you have all these people like talking this kid up like he's, you know, one of a kind, the most amazing person anyone's ever met. And he's just so great. And the whole time we're just staring at the screen and we're like, what is wrong with all of you? Can you not see that this is scary?
Right. I mean, I would say 10 minutes was probably pretty accurate. I would say by the time we finished the interview portion, I was like, this kid has
mental
issues
health
and
issues,
demons
definitely,
that need to be worked out.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, more times than not, mental health issues play into someone's path to being homeless.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate, but it is the truth.
And it was totally glossed over by everybody that was involved. Everybody that came in contact with him after the interview portion, nobody cared.
At first.
Until we finally got to the guy that was from Northern California that I think was employed by some of the reality TV people that were trying to like get him into these interviews and stuff to track him down, corral Kai, and then bring him over to New York City.
Yes.
Finally, this guy has a brain, and he's like, this kid has some demons that he's fighting, and why do you want him?
Yeah.
This is not going to go well. He's like, I immediately smelled liquor on him from like 10 feet away.
Yep.
And he's just not there.
Yeah.
Is not somebody that you can trust to be employed in the way that they're trying to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And
without receiving help first.
Exactly.
If that's the case, you know.
And one of the big things that he mentioned, I think his name was JR, and he was talking about like he had to get Kai, he had to have him sign a contract, and then they were going to put him up in a hotel, get him, you know, ready to go for his television experience because he was going on Jimmy Kimmel. We'll get to that in a minute. But Kai signs his contract in hieroglyphics.
Yeah, it's just like a bunch of triangles and a bunch of swirly
symbols. Like it's not an actual signature. Like it's not his name.
And the guy said it took 10 minutes for him to sign.
Exactly. And so from there, he's like, no, this kid is not
well.
He's not well, and he's not what like everyone is thinking he is. And then you have, you know, this other woman who I really don't know exactly who she was. I think she was a producer again, like someone else that worked for.
Yeah, she was like the reality TV brand manager. It was Lisa, I think was her name.
Yeah. So, you know, she and this JR guy, and there was one other person too that was working on it, and they were all, you know, getting Kai there. That was like this big feat for them to have to do because obviously he is homeless. He doesn't have a permanent address. So first of all, finding him and then getting him somewhere. He doesn't have an ID. He doesn't have any way to get on a plane. So they have to figure out a way to get him to where he needs to be. And within this whole experience, they're seeing how unstable he actually is. He's serial peeing on things.
Right.
He's,
out in the open.
Exactly. Like literally in the middle of the street, he's peeing on the Hollywood Stars or whatever it was.
Yep.
I forget what those are called, but and then like he gets into the hotel, and the first thing he does, he goes right for a bottle of, I think it was Jack Daniels, and he's immediately drinking, and you know, he's just clearly all over the place and just
goes down to the lobby, rides his skateboard over the cobblestone foyer area, gets kicked out of the hotel.
Yep.
Ends up peeing on more stuff.
Yes. And then this woman ends up letting Kai sleep at her house when she is, I assume at the time, probably a single woman who lived by herself, because she did mention that it was just her in the house.
Yes.
Nobody else was living there. So
you're bringing in this guy that you don't know that clearly has issues.
That just hit someone in the head 3 times with a hatchet, like however many days before.
And you know that he has, you know, spontaneous actions, and just by conversing with him, JR was like, this guy was saying some crazy shit.
Yeah.
So this lady was willing to risk her life to try and pursue fame with Kai.
Essentially, that's what it seemed like to me. And I'm telling you, right, you couldn't pay me enough.
No.
You could not pay me enough to be like, hey, this guy that just committed this violent act who you have now been around for at least 24 hours, you have to let him sleep at your house with just you.
Yeah, no. I would find like a Best Western, whatever, and, you know, let him stay there, and hopefully he doesn't run away throughout the night.
Yes.
But I think that was probably also the portion of it where, like, she doesn't trust him to not run away.
Yeah.
So by bringing him into her house, she can kind of keep an eye on him. Maybe she slept with a knife by the side of the bed.
I mean, maybe. Also, here's another thing that I was thinking about. Maybe there's more context to this story that we don't know. And for all you know, this documentary was set up in this way to almost make it seem like she had experienced all of this with him before that.
Yeah.
But you know that there's always like
Cuts
an agenda.
and
Exactly. So they're trying to put out what they want to put out in their timeline that they want to portray this in. So there is always the possibility that this didn't go down exactly in this way, but that's what they're showing to you.
Right. And I wouldn't doubt that.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have no evidence of that being true, but I wouldn't doubt it because the way that this whole documentary is framed, it has, you know, the incident where they build him up to be the hero, and then they're trying to build his character, and they're like, oh, yeah, there's all these setbacks because he's acting kind of, you know, crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, we still got him there. We got him on Jimmy Kimmel, and then there's some weird stuff said on that. He made, you know, some comments about fat, rich white guys, and Jimmy was like, oh, you're talking to one, or fat white people, you're talking to one. So, like, he was going off on tangents that were not related at all to the conversation, which, right off the bat, that shows me that somebody is not fully coherent, fully lucid.
Well, he can't follow directions. He can't follow the instructions. He's on national television, and he doesn't give a single shit what he's saying, what he's doing, how he's acting, how he's being portrayed.
Right.
And I think
But in his mind, he's like acting like funny.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of it. And I think that's also what happened with the interview that went viral in general.
Right.
And he was just, you know,
acting, kind of being
like embellishing, like, let me tell you exactly what happened. And, you know, like, especially this wasn't in like the clip we played for you guys, but I watched the interview earlier today. And, you know, he says like, oh, the guy came around and bear hugged this woman, and a guy of that size could snap a woman's neck like a pencil. You know, so he's like very descriptive with all of these things that are going on. And it's like a 6-minute interview about this whole situation. And I just think like that just continues on with all these other appearances that he makes, that he's still doing that same thing. And he wants to go off on these tangents and talk about what he wants to talk about. He doesn't care what Jimmy Kimmel wants to talk about. He doesn't care about anything other than what he wants to talk about in that moment. But I have to say, Jimmy Kimmel did do a very good job of derailing him trying to get into this other subject when he said that whole, oh, you're talking to one, like, let's move on, you know, self-deprecating, I think is what they said. And that was really good, and it kept the interview going. So, you know, I think the fact that he wound up on Jimmy Kimmel in the first place is like, why? But, you know, I think it's just the whole fact that he was like this big internet sensation now.
Right.
But after Jimmy Kimmel is when I think they started talking about the fact that they essentially want to give this kid a reality TV show.
Right. They want to give him some type of show, whether it be reality TV or what they tried to do was, what the hell was it called?
It was some sort of movie review thing or TV show or some sort of review where like he would watch a movie and like provide commentary.
Right. Like Kai's movie reviews or something like that.
Something like that. And they gave like this montage essentially of him just rambling about nothingness that pertained to nothing that he was supposed to be watching or whatever. And I guess they even tried putting on a trailer for a movie, and he couldn't even sit through 2 minutes of that to be able to
regurgitate his thoughts on it.
Exactly. And, you know, now they're like starting to realize, okay, this is not going to work because he cannot follow direction. He would be nearly impossible to give a TV show. Like, this is just ridiculous at this point, but it's taking them so long to realize it based on the way this documentary is framed.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, this could have all taken place very quickly, and it's like, no, you know, we heard about him, then we wanted to get him on Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
This happened, and it could have happened, you know, super fast, and maybe these people realized it in a quicker fashion, but it doesn't come off that way in the documentary. It comes off as like there's only 4 or 5 people with a brain in here that actually see Kai for what he is, somebody that's unwell and needs help.
Yeah, and I would say at this point, probably at the point where we're like watching the Jimmy Kimmel portion, John and I are like looking at each other saying, why has this kid not been talked to by police?
Yes.
He was not only the main witness to this crime because he was literally the passenger in the car that hit this utility worker. He also attacked the suspect in that other attack And he's just willy-nilly going wherever the hell he wants, doing whatever the heck he wants. And like no police officers have stopped this kid to talk to him. Like, what is happening?
Right. And I don't know how. Maybe it's just the way the documentary was framed.
Yeah.
But it looks like he's interviewed right after the incident, and then he just goes on his way.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like he was stopped and brought to the police station to give a witness statement. I mean, you would probably have to take a formal statement for something like that where you want to have it written down. So he's probably going to the station. It seems like he just left.
It's not like a witness statement of a car accident where you just talk to the cop on the scene and you say, oh, I saw this, 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 and this, and that's it. And it's a quick thing that they write down.
Right.
That's a full statement because what you find out in the interview, what you find out later, there's a lot that happened in that car before the accident.
Why was he in the car to begin with?
Because he's a hitchhiker.
Right. We didn't really know that he was driving or in the passenger seat of the guy, Jet, I think was his name.
Yeah,
the
Jet
guy who he
McBride.
attacked.
Yeah.
He was actually the passenger in the car during the time of the accident when he hit the utility worker. You kind of learn that later. But
yeah, I feel like some of the framing just like really wants you to focus on Kai and how he's this hero and not like any of the other stuff that's going on.
But that all true crime buffs would want to know about, though.
Exactly. I feel like that's what we were doing this whole time is just asking all these questions like, why is this documentary not telling me the things that I really want to know?
Right. That's the thing. Like when you turn into something that's under the true crime genre and, you know, it's called the Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker and you find out that, you know, this guy tried to kill people and then Kai stopped him, but he hit him with a hatchet. It's like, oh, I want to know about like, what was this guy's motivation for wanting to hit these people? And then where did Kai come out from with the hatchet to stop him? And what were the court proceedings like? And what did the guy get charged with? And blah, blah, blah. And like, you only get sprinklings of that throughout the whole documentary. And it's mostly from the second half on.
But the whole documentary just felt very focused on Kai.
Yes, and not...
And his character and who he was and his viral video. Like, it had nothing to do with the crimes that were taking place.
And what happens after crimes have been committed.
Exactly.
Which is kind of what you want to know about when tuning into a documentary like that.
Exactly.
So the next character that I think we were kind of introduced to was that, was he a state trooper? He was a former homicide guy. I think his name was Jeff.
In Fresno, the cop in Fresno.
The corniest entrance to a documentary ever. Of course, cop comes in uniform. He's got sunglasses on inside, takes them off, and he's like, I'm blah, 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 blah.
From
I'm like,
so-and-so
oh my
department.
God.
We were like,
so corny.
What? Did he just do that right now?
He had to be like, this is how I'm entering. If you want me to talk, this is what I'm doing. And they were like, all right, fine. Do it.
It was either that or they were like, listen, we have this cool idea, man, and we really want you to do it.
No. This was this guy all day long. I want
to know.
You can tell by the way he talks later on.
Yeah, he's like a little cheesy about it. Like, hey, I got my way.
Right. So he ends up coming in after the Jimmy Kimmel portion, and he wants to corral Kai to bring him to the pretrial conference for Jet's charges.
Yeah, and finally we're like, okay, cool. We're going to learn some stuff about what happened and like why Kai even hit this guy with the freaking hatchet in the first place.
And we didn't.
Not really, no.
Essentially, like, it glosses over it briefly, and it's just like, oh, yeah, you know, he was an important witness. He was firsthand. He's the main witness, and we need to make sure that he shows up for this. So he ends up getting hold of him, brings him over, and they handle the pretrial conference stuff. And then we move on. We don't get any more, you know, law-related stuff.
I think they showed a little bit of the hearing.
Right, but it's not a lot.
No, it's not.
Nothing substantial.
No, and I would say it's more so just like little snippets of what Kai said at the hearing that we kind of already knew. And something that we haven't mentioned before is I guess this Jet McBride guy allegedly said something along the lines of that he was Jesus and that he could make these decisions and do whatever he wanted and, you know, a couple other random things that he was supposedly spewing. And I believe the utility worker that he hit was a black male, and he said that he was doing this because he was black. And so that was really all we knew so far. And that's kind of really all you got from Kai's statement at the hearing as well. They didn't give you a lot more. At this point, though, you do see Jet McBride. You see him at the hearing.
And this is when I found out he was alive.
Yes.
Pretty much right around this time.
When we were like, okay, so now we know that he didn't die from this hatchet attack. Okay, that makes sense. So, you know, and I think this might have been around the time when you saw the
gore.
Some of the
injuries.
The not so pretty stuff.
Right. So from the court portion, the little bit that we got, then we meet this guy, Gabriel, from the Redcoats, and he's really the first, like, honest person when it comes to why he wanted to be or why he was okay with being around Kai.
Well, but I think this started because they were now getting back to Kai, and they were talking about what he was doing next. They're, moving on. They're like, all right, no more of the true crime stuff. Like, we're going to get back to Kai and his, fame and all of this.
And interactions with all these other people that we were able to group up and give comment on what happened when they met him.
Yeah, and I think he was supposed to be, because obviously he had done that other interview where he sang that song and he played the guitar, and I think he was having a show at the same place that this Gabriel guy was holding a show.
Right.
So that's kind of how the two of them met and how their connection was kind of formed. And now I think that's why we're getting a piece from him, because he, obviously had opinions and...
Right, and he's saying that he didn't really know of Kai, but he knew about the virality around his whole situation.
Yeah.
And he agreed to do the show with Kai because, here's the honesty, he wanted Kai's audience.
Yeah.
And I was him and his band did.
Yeah. And I was like, finally.
Somebody being honest.
Yes. Like, just don't try and say, oh, we think this kid's so great. We think he's a hero. We
want to get him these deals.
Him.
We want him to get him money so he doesn't have to live on the street anymore and all this stuff. It's like...
just be honest. You see dollar signs.
Right, and that's why you want to get him signed.
You see popularity. You see building your own audience based on his. And that's fine. And that's what this Gabriel kid said. And I was like, thank you. Thank you for saying that you want more clout and you're going to use someone to get it.
Right, and... even though you don't necessarily want to be associated with him, you'll do what it takes to get his audience.
Exactly. And I appreciated the honesty.
Right. And then he drops the bombshell where Kai essentially says to him, yeah, I was in the car with Jet and I gave him a laced joint and he smoked it and started saying all this crazy shit before the accident and before he attacked these people.
And of course, this is hearsay. This is just what Gabriel is saying. We don't know that this is fact at all. I guess they did also, later on we find out about this, but I guess they tested the joint and it was said that it was just marijuana in there. So I don't know.
I think they did a tox screen on Jet and the only thing that was in his system was marijuana.
Oh, okay. That would make sense then.
But some tests, I don't know, if you can run one test or a toxicology report will come back on every single thing that could be in somebody's body or... if it just tests for cocaine, methamphetamines, and marijuana.
Yeah.
And like maybe some other weird thing
do you have to
wouldn't
check
be...
off the other boxes to say, was there this drug and that drug?
Yeah, do you have to test specifically for something?
Yeah.
But, I mean, you have this guy, Gabriel, from the Redcoats, that's saying that Kai said this to him, and he's like, holy shit, like, this guy could have just went crazy because this homeless guy hitchhiking gave him a laced joint unbeknownst to him, and then all this happened. And then he's like, I don't really want to be associated with him. We joined into this, agreement to do the show together just because we wanted his audience. But then I heard this crazy shit and I was like, I'm done. I don't want to deal with this.
Yeah. And then within this whole thing, you meet the manager of the bar. I think it was called Fulton 55. His name was Tony Martin, and he's interviewed because this is the venue essentially that the Redcoats and Kai are going to be performing at.
Finally, somebody else with a good judge of character.
Yeah. He's like, we didn't like him. We were put off by him.
He was like, I didn't like him from the second that I met him.
Yeah.
And then once Kai was treating his employees bad, he was trying to get free drinks because of who he was. The guy was like, no, we don't do that here.
Yep.
And then he kicked him out eventually, and then he was pissing outside again, outside the bar, and the guy was just like, no, I didn't want anything to do with him to begin with. And then once I met him, I didn't like him even more, and then eventually I kicked him out, and I was just like, good. But I think that's a trait that is very good for somebody that's owning a venue or managing a venue that hosts different artists to play music and stuff like that. You need to be able to suss out BS. Like we were saying earlier, it seemed like this whole documentary was framed that like all these people that came in contact with Kai outside of, a handful, they all had the blinders on because they wanted to get some type of benefit out of him. Whether they wanted to, take a picture with him or they wanted to try and sign him to, some type of contract to make a TV show or everything like that.
Whatever it is.
And then you just have these few shining beacons where you have, JR, who met him and was like, this guy's crazy. You had Gabriel, who's like, I was kind of sketchy about this guy. And then he said the whole thing about the laced joint to me. And I was like, no way. And then you have Tony, the manager, who's like, no, I'm not about it. But and it's like, you only have these few people that do that. But
I also wonder, again, is this a framing thing? because in editing and specific questions that you're asking people,
I bet
are
it
you
is.
getting the answers that you want to frame each person in a way to make the audience believe, wow, what's wrong with you? Why would you let him stay at your house overnight? Or why
Right.
would you have him do this? You know, was that actually the case? Because I think back to our episode on John William Leonard Sr. And do you remember when we were talking about fear and how it was someone that was like related to the building? I forget if he had previously owned it or something.
Yep.
And he was originally, they said like, oh, he was gung-ho. He was on board for the show and all of this stuff. And then after the fact, it came out that he was not happy with what went down
Right.
and that the things that were said and all of that were not how he meant them and
Taken out
all
of
of this other
context and
stuff.
framed.
Yeah, so I wonder if, you know, there's that behind the scenes thing and they're like, all right, well, we want this to read this way
Right.
and we have to ask the specific questions to get it to come out in the way that we want it, and we have to frame these people in this way. So as an audience member, originally when we were watching this, we only watched it a couple nights ago, I was like, wow, these people are so dumb. Oh my God, they can't, you know, they're all so stupid, blah, blah, blah. Like I was being really mean and I was like, I can't believe these people.
Well, I was too. I mean,
yeah.
it's hard not to, especially when you're in like this true crime vein.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do this, we have the podcast, and we're up to date on a lot of the ongoings within that type of category.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to not look at it like that. I would be very surprised to have, you know, a true crime aficionado watching this documentary and not be like, are these people serious right now?
Yeah. But I will say, now that I've had a couple days to sit on it, to really think it over, I'm realizing that there are a lot of documentaries out there that are skewed for the opinion of the people creating it.
Yeah, I think so. I think that they may not have even asked these questions in like a particularly, you know, sneaky way.
Yeah.
All they do is they take the pieces that they want and they put them in where they want them.
Exactly.
So there could have been so much more context to the story that Lisa gave when she allowed Kai to sleep at her house that it was like, you know, my executive was breathing down my neck. They're like, you better make sure that he gets to Jimmy Kimmel or we're going to fire you. And there was no way that I could let him go anywhere else besides my house, because if I would have let him run away or he disappeared, I would have lost my job.
Yeah, exactly.
There could have
So
been
if you
that
knew
behind
that,
the scenes, right?
Yeah.
So you never know. But I mean, as far as like reviewing the documentary, it does seem like a lot of these people were just blinded by
dollar signs
or promotions or whatever.
Yeah, I agree.
Outside of the few that we've talked about.
Yeah. So now after this whole Redcoats interview, you know, you're really starting to see at this point Kai's downfall. You know, a lot of his
He's
horror
drinking a lot.
qualities, you know, those are coming out. You're starting to see more of that. Not like it was in the very beginning where he's this hero and everybody loves him and he's so great and all of that. You're starting to now realize that he's been through some shit. Obviously, we had already mentioned that we didn't believe he was mentally well, and now we're really starting to see more of that, and it kind of moves into more information now on his childhood, his upbringing, some of his social media posts that he had made at the time. They start talking about some of his earliest memories and things that he posted on Facebook. And, you know, he originally was from Alberta, Canada. I guessed that when we were watching, but we didn't know for sure. And then they actually interview one of his cousins to get a little bit more information because he had said a lot of things that were really horrifying if he, you know, indeed
Right, like
did experience those as a child.
Right, being locked in a cage, essentially.
Yeah,
and
never being allowed out of his room and things like that. And so they interview, what's his name? Jeremy McGilvery Wolf, his first cousin. And, you know, he kind of corroborated a little bit of that and, you know, said they were really close. He said that they were like brothers, that there were instances where Kai was locked in his room, where he wasn't allowed to go outside. But you then also start to learn that he wasn't the easiest child. He was a little bit of a problematic child. And, you know, I think there were a lot of different issues in his upbringing that have led him to where he is now.
Yeah.
But you start to learn a little bit more of that. And, you know, I think all of that culminated together into really what happened and like why he
How
is
he got to
living
where he
this
was.
lifestyle and why he's now committing this violent act and all of that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you're right. And I think the cousin even made mention that there was one time where he stayed with Kai, and I think they got locked in the room together.
maybe
There was some type
I
of
like
comment like
vaguely
that.
remember that.
So
but
it
also
did-
Kai was like starting fires in the house
Right.
supposedly. So there were like both sides of the coin, where he might have been acting out, but he could have been acting out because other things were happening. So it's really hard to figure out exactly what had been going on.
Yes, and I would say that the cousin's portion of the interview did affirm a lot of, these negative aspects of Kai's upbringing, though.
Yeah.
That could have, helped turn him into the guy that he is today.
Yeah, I agree.
And then we meet the mother. We meet
Yes.
Kai's mom.
We meet Shirley.
And she's like just not a likable person right off the bat, at least in my opinion. She's trying to give her story. She's stumbling over her words. Obviously, if you're not a media person and you're not in front of cameras often, it's
that's
easy to be
makes
nervous.
sense.
But
I mean, everybody go back. I mean, don't do it. But if you go back and listen to our first episode, you'll see what we mean.
Right. I mean, so obviously there are nerves that can come into play when you're giving an interview and you may stumble over your words and stuff, but it just seemed as though she was very dismissive of any negative things that she may have done during Kai's upbringing. She made mention that he was a difficult child and he would wake up early in the morning, so she would have to lock him in his room because he would get up before she would and be mischievous.
And she used the terminology of being a responsible parent.
Right.
But what I think would be a more responsible parent would be to not lock them in their room overnight. But that is, just my opinion. I wouldn't be doing that as a parent, but...
Right. But on her side, and I do not want to be on her side at all because I don't think she's likable and I didn't agree with a lot of what she said. But, I mean, if you're asleep at, 5 o'clock in the morning and your adolescent child sneaks out of bed, it's not like you're not getting up with them. It's like, no, this kid was sneaky and he got up and he tried to start a freaking fire or something.
That's different, yeah.
So I could understand the plight of a parent who just can't seem to get their child on a schedule, and no matter what they do, maybe they're always, getting into trouble, stuff like that.
But I think it was one of those things where Kai would say one thing, the mom would have the perfect excuse for why.
Always an excuse,
Kai would
right.
say one thing, she'd have the perfect excuse for why she was still a good parent, even though the way Kai is framing it, it's in this way in which he felt as though he was essentially abused, whereas the mom would frame it in, no, I was being a responsible parent. So you're seeing both sides, and it's like, okay.
All right, where's the truth?
Exactly. And the truth usually lies somewhere in the middle. So who knows what's exactly true, but just knowing that the cousin was able to corroborate stuff, but then you don't have anybody corroborating what the mom said.
Well, I mean, the only thing that comes to my mind, right, is that you have the cousin corroborating some of the stuff that Kai had said that happened to him during his childhood. You have the mother coming forward, kind of giving excuses, always having some type of retort for whatever, complaint may come forward towards her about her parenting style and stuff. But she never shows emotion at all throughout the whole thing.
No.
It's always dismissive, and being a responsible parent when you have a child that, and I say this as a person that deals with a lot of, people through work. If your child is acting out like this, you need to find them help.
Yeah.
You don't just lock them in a room. You need to, reach out to other agencies that may be able to provide some type of support or whatever. So
even if you can't get access to those resources, if you don't have the
Right.
money or something, I am sure there are other people that you could talk to even just get some sort of advice.
Right, and it seems as though Shirley had disdain for Kai.
It did feel that way, but it's interesting you say that too, because it seems as though, at least based on a couple articles that I read, that she kept in constant contact with him once he was in prison.
Yeah, once he was in prison.
So
what about
it's-
the years or however much time beforehand?
Yeah.
And there was that portion, I think it was a little bit later than what we're going to get into now, but there's a portion of her interview where she talks about when she was told that Kai was arrested for murder.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh no, what happened?
Yeah,
I'm
she
like-
was totally like deadpan.
Was that not like a traumatic event for you that, would bring some type of emotion out of you when you're talking about it?
Yeah. What
Maybe
did
that's
she
me
say
being judgy,
exactly?
but,
I have it written down here. She said something along the lines of, nope, hadn't heard that. Crap, what happened?
right.
But, what? I'm sorry.
Nope, haven't heard that.
Crap.
What happened? Like, really?
Like-
You just find out your kid is charged with murder?
And that's your reaction?
But let's get into that whole portion before.
Yeah, so now this is
hand.
where we get into, I think, how they labeled it, Kai's fall from grace.
Which I don't think he was ever,
All
up
that
there
graceful.
with grace,
Yeah.
I mean, he was a troubled person that people were parading around to try and make money off of and did not provide him the help that he needed.
Yeah, and I think that's really unfortunate, and I think that's something that was really glossed over because obviously you don't want to shine this really bad light on all of these people to say like, hello, this guy was
But it happens all
clearly
the time.
struggling, and it does, and that just sucks.
Right. So clearly he needed help. He didn't get it. And then that's where this kind of culminates to, I guess, the real true crime portion of this documentary.
Yeah, I would say so.
Because it's not about Jet, the guy that drove his car into the utility worker or attacked this lady. Mm-hmm. It's about Kai. So the next person I think we meet was it Bob?
Bob Ellenport, yes.
Yeah, he was contacted by Joe Galfie's law firm. Joe was a lawyer, and he never showed up to court on a Monday morning, I think.
Yep, and Bob was his backyard neighbor.
Yeah, so Bob goes to check on him, notices that Sunday and Monday's paper are still there, which is uncommon, I would assume.
Yeah, it seemed like Joe always brought in his newspaper. He read it every day. That was a very common occurrence for him. So now at this point, Bob's like, okay, I'm concerned. Here. Even though everything looked normal. He said the house looked okay, everything looked fine, but the one thing that was off was the papers, and obviously now he's not showing up to court.
Right.
He's concerned.
So he calls in for the welfare check, and I think police must end up going by there.
Yep.
And they end up finding that Joe has been murdered. They find him in a pool of blood in the bedroom, and this is where when we were watching it, we're like, okay, how is Kai connected to this? He must have killed this guy.
That's what you would assume just based on the fact that this entire documentary is about him.
Right, and then you have this murder that happens.
Yeah. So now at this point, you're getting a little bit of the investigation portion of things. And, now you're really diving into the true crime aspect. You're looking at what the police are doing. How are they tracking things down? How are they getting to Kai? Mm-hmm. And I have to say, this is the part of the documentary that had me confused.
Yes.
The timeline was throwing me off. I was struggling to follow exactly what it is that they were doing, because all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we're looking at the crime scene photos, we're looking at the house, and we find a random piece of paper with a phone number on it. And come to find out, that's Kai's phone number.
Didn't it have his name on it or no?
I think it had Lawrence on it.
Maybe Kai Lawrence?
It had something on it, but either way, there was a piece of paper somehow linked to Kai. It was his phone number on it. I know that. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, you're now at this point where they're like, oh yeah, there's this guy who now they're trying to track down, and then...
I think that paper actually had like his phone number and maybe his email address on it, or his name. I think the name was Kai Lawrence, because I'm pretty sure then the detectives come in, they're talking about the crime scene and everything, and then they type in Kai Lawrence into Google, and they find Kai, the Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker. Mm. And then they're like, oh, we need to find this guy.
And then they call Fresno PD.
Talk to the sunglasses cop.
Yep, and he's like, oh, he had a really thick Eastern Coast accent. And I was like, okay, sure.
That was one of the other comments that he made, like the way he was going about his interview. I was like, this guy definitely wanted to wear those sunglasses when he came onto the scene. So essentially, not to get into the whole rigmarole, they end up finding Kai. They bring him...
But that's what I mean, though. This is the part that was confusing to me. And I think now, as we're talking about it more and kind of reminiscing, and we also have the documentary on in the background as we're talking about this, it's making a little bit more sense. But the first time around watching this, I was thrown off after they called the cop in Fresno. I expected them to be like, okay, we're going to track him down, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden they cut to like this footage of him at some train station, because apparently they found a train ticket in the house, and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah, I think that if this crime, the murder of Joe Galfie, was made into its own documentary, I think the whole portion of figuring out it was Kai, finding Kai, and all this stuff could have been, a 2 or 3 episode portion of a documentary series. Because, like you said, it was a little bit confusing. They essentially jump right to this train footage. I mean, long story short, they end up finding the information about Kai. They find out who Kai is. They reach out. They try to get a hold of him. They're putting out all this footage about Kai being with Joe at the train station or bus station or whatever it was, and then finding him and bringing him into custody.
Yeah.
There's a portion where Kai reaches out to a female, fan.
Yeah, some girl he was communicating with on social media. I don't exactly know how they connected, but...
Meets up with her. Mm-hmm. They take a picture together. She posts it online. And then throughout the investigation, they end up finding out that is Kai. So then they have this new recent picture where Kai has cut his hair. Mm-hmm. Looks different. He has a face tattoo on, I think the right side of his face. Now they have a new picture and they put it out. They end up capturing him.
Yeah, they find him in Philadelphia.
And they bring him in for the murder.
Which, mind you, I do just want to mention as well, because we kind of glossed over this, but this murder of Joe Galfi took place on May 12th, 2013 in New Jersey. So Kai had originally been in California. That's where everything started. This was in February of 2013. Now by May of 2013, he's across the country. He had been in New York, and then somehow, probably through the train station, he met Joe, all of that. He winds up in New Jersey because that's where Joe lived.
Right, because he still didn't have, even after this appearance and people trying to hook him up with some type of deal or whatever, he didn't have a house. He didn't have money coming in, at least from what the documentary portrays.
So now we're at the point where, he's communicating with Kim, and he's supposedly...
Which is the girl, right?
Yeah, Kim was, I guess they call her fan number 1. So she is communicating with Kai while essentially, I think, based on the way the documentary portrays it, while he's spending time with Joe Galfi. So he's with Joe over like a 2-day span of time over that weekend. I think it was between May 10th and May 12th.
I think he stayed with Joe probably on the 10th or some day prior to the 12th, close to the 12th though. So 10th, 11th, maybe whatever. And after he leaves, I think he was trying to get to her, to hang out with her.
Yes.
And then plans fall through with her. He can't stay there. So then he hits Joe back up.
And then
he wants to go back to Joe. And then when he goes to Joe, this whole assault and murder takes place. Then it's found out later on, and then they track him down and bring him in for first-degree murder.
Yes, and he was arrested on the 16th of May, so 4 days. So they did get to him very quickly, I think. So they find him, they bring him in.
They interrogate
him, and you see a portion of the interrogation. And essentially, how I'm interpreting this, Kai confesses, but he says that him attacking Joe was in self-defense. And this kind of goes back to something from earlier, which we hadn't touched on yet. But at this point, Kai is alleging that Joe sexually assaulted him. And he had mentioned previously that he had been sexually assaulted by at least one other man in the past. He had some other potential sexual assaults that had occurred. I'm not exactly sure when.
He had multiple instances of trauma in his past, weirdly related to old white men.
Yeah.
Which he made a comment about on Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a precursor to the violence against Joe.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. So in this interrogation, he admits that he hit him, all of this stuff.
But is saying it's under the guise of self-defense because he was being sexually assaulted and he was drugged because Joe wanted to give him a beer, but he didn't want to give him beer in the bottle. He wanted to pour it into a glass to try and, allude to the fact that he probably drugged him.
Yeah.
So but you could put drugs in a bottle too.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, that's just him trying to make up a reason why it should be believable that Joe drugged him.
I agree, yes. And once he's essentially given all this information to the police, he's like, I think I should be talking to a lawyer, shouldn't I? I should get a lawyer. And then the interrogation ends. So from there, now you're starting to find out a little bit more. You're finding out, a little bit of the timeline here. The fact that Kai supposedly went either a day before or 2 days before Joe was killed. And then he was also posting things on Facebook where he's saying things that potentially happened to him, like asking what you would do in this situation.
Right, and they're graphic sexual assault type depictions in these comments.
Yeah.
Those were posted before
the
Joe
murder
was killed.
took place, yes.
And then it's like, so you're posting these things, essentially alluding to the fact that you were sexually assaulted by, I don't know if it was an old white guy in the comment, in the Facebook comment of the post, but alluding to the fact hey, this person just did something terrible to you, unspeakable to you. What would you do?
Exactly.
And then he ends up going back to this guy's house for the second time after he allegedly sexually assaulted him.
Yeah, and then he goes back again, and that's supposedly when the murder took place.
Right. The night that the plans fell through with Kim, fan number 1, he went back to Joe because he needed a place to stay, and that's the night that he killed Joe.
Yeah, and I feel like as we're talking about this right now, it's convoluted. It's difficult to follow. I just wish this documentary had done Joe's story better.
Yeah.
And kept it clearer rather than focusing it so much on Kai. I understand, the documentary is called The Hatchet Wielding Hitchhiker. I get it. But Joe is the one who was killed here.
Right. I think more time should have been devoted to that case.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
that's not that the other crime at the beginning with Jet wasn't serious, but this is like what you're basing your story around Kai, and this is the crime that he committed.
I feel like we get 20 to 25 minutes on this, where we got an hour and 10 minutes on everything to do with Kai.
Right.
I think at the end of the day, what I'm trying to get at is I just wish they focused more on what happened to Joe and fleshing out that story better to make it easily understandable.
Yeah, so I think we're at to the point, so we made it through the whole timeline. I know it took a long time, but we made it through the whole timeline of the documentary itself. Just to recap, we had the incident, which we call the interview, where Jessup interviewed Kai. Then they build up his whole, marketable, I say that in air quotes, his marketable character, try to build him up into the, next big thing, this sensation, the internet meme or whatever. And then the more time that they spend with this guy, the more they realize that he's unhinged, that he's unwell, that he needs help. Then you so you build him up, then you reach the peak, then you kind of start to see the downfall, and then the crescendo at the very end where we have him killing Joe. For the review portion of this, I think after talking about it a little bit more and after reflecting on it a little bit more, I had originally given it a 5. I think I give it a 4. A very close, maybe 3.5 to 4. Because if we're saying, and we're harsh raters,
we're
me in particular.
Super harsh critics.
Me in particular.
I wasn't when John and I first met, but I have become much harsher.
Yeah.
So my grade's not that low. I gave it like a 5.5.
So hear me out, and maybe I can change your mind, maybe you can change my mind.
Okay.
But we have so many gripes with this. I mean, was it entertaining to watch? And I don't mean entertaining as like, it's
in
weird
this
to
gross
say,
way?
Right, it's weird to say like if something's entertaining. No, I think if it keeps your attention.
I
so
agree. Yeah.
It kept my attention throughout it, but I had a lot of problems even while watching it.
Yeah.
And then after reflecting upon it, I have even more problems with it.
Yeah.
So how can I say that it is a 5? It is an average documentary. To me, if it kept my attention, but it was nothing special, that is an average documentary. This, I had so many problems with it throughout. How can I say that it's average?
Yeah. But at the same time, I think about the fact that the people who are producing and creating this documentary are doing so to entertain people as much as it's not the word you want to use. It's what they're doing. It is entertainment. And it kept your attention. It kept you engaged. You wanted to know what happened, especially as people who didn't know anything about Kai, didn't know about the viral video, didn't know about all the memes and all the stuff that came from it.
Which I think still blows my mind more than the documentary itself.
I know, you were at peak age for that.
I know. I can't believe I don't remember any of it. I think there may have been 1 or 2 times where I saw like an image and a meme made around the interview photo of him when he has his hair tied back. Not even the smash thing, but just him, like his image at some point throughout the documentary.
Yeah.
Or that initial interview.
But you probably didn't know where it ever stemmed from.
Nope.
Or
Never looked into it, never even knew the name Kai, so this was totally fresh to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still have a gripe with, it kept your attention the whole time and stuff like that. It did, but more out of like frustration, like I wanted more, I wanted to know more.
This is true, yeah.
So it's like, I don't know, I'm not saying that to try and change your mind or to change anybody listening's mind, but my whole thought process on when grading something is, you got to start at a 5. And if it's better than average, it goes up. And if you have gripes with it, it goes down.
This is a genuine problem that John and I have where so many people are so willing to give either like 5 or 10 stars, depending on what they're rating, when they're just averagely satisfied.
If something is 5 stars out of 5, it is
sensational.
Unbelievable. To coin Brandon.
Yes.
But like 10 out of 10.
Has
5
to
out of
be
5.
the most impeccable experience you've ever had in your life.
If something is good, it's not a 10.
The only thing I've ever rated a 10 is what, John?
Station 11.
Yes. The only thing. I don't think I've ever rated anything else that high. Like even Verity. I didn't give 5.
Even Last Night in Soho.
I love
that movie.
I did love that movie, but that is not peak for me.
For you, right.
It's
so,
not.
I don't know. I'll just leave it as, I'll give it a 4. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt on that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want people to take my rating and be like, oh, he rated it a 4. Like, I don't even want to
waste my
Not
time.
that they really care about my opinion on things or anything, but...
I think so some people listening probably care about your opinion.
Yeah,
Let
I
us
guess.
know. We would like to know that. Do you care about John's opinion?
Yeah. So, I don't know. I wasn't impressed by it. There was a lot left to question and just a lot of things left unanswered. And I guess if that was what they were hoping to do with the documentary, to like bring more attention to this and to get people interested and want to know more, then I guess they succeeded, because they gave me nothing that I wanted for the most part.
Yeah.
And everything that I would want to know, I have to go find on my own. And maybe that was their intention.
Well,
you know, maybe it's like a long hook. It's an hour and some odd minute hook to get you interested in the case.
I mean, maybe, but I think my biggest gripe with everything is really the ending of it all, and the fact that, like, you learn about what happened to Joe Galfi. You learn about the fact that Kai was arrested. He goes to trial. He ends up convicted, but you find out really nothing about what tied him to it.
Right. No case information whatsoever.
What is the evidence other than the fact that, like, he's seen on video with Joe at the train station?
And they talk about the injuries to Joe.
Yes, they talk about his injuries. They talk about the attack. But my biggest gripe with the whole thing is they have this huge character development of this guy, and he has this major character development in a bad way. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they beefed him up so much and all these good things about him. And then once you get to the end where you're starting to realize, oh my God, what happened? What did he do? They gloss over all of the bad stuff.
They didn't try as hard to make him look bad as much as they tried to make him look good at the beginning.
I completely agree. And I think that's where, now I'm going to drop it down 0.5 on my score. I'm going to give it a straight 5.
A straight 5? Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
That's a fair score, I think.
For you.
For me, yeah. John's 1 point lower. We usually never agree on our ratings. We almost never have the same rating on anything.
Right.
He's harsher.
So,
that's it.
Yeah, but I mean, we didn't do a deep dive into looking into this case after the fact. We browsed over some of the court documents and looked up a couple articles and stuff. But to give you guys some information that, you know, you wouldn't glean just from watching the documentary.
Yeah, so say you watch the documentary and you listen to this review and that's it. That's all you know. You don't want to go on a Googling spree to find out everything else about this person. This is going to give you a lot of the context that we feel like was missing.
Yeah, at least some of the context. Because this is not going to be a deep dive into the case.
No, it's not.
Just, you know, some of the questions that were left unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
So, essentially what we learned was that Kai needed a place to stay when he was in New York City. He came upon Joe. Joe seemed like this nice old guy, gave him a place to stay, said, yeah, you can come back with me, whatever. Brings Kai back. This is where Kai alleged that he was drugged and sexually assaulted. And this is where one of his comments on Facebook stemmed from. He said that he woke up with, you know, semen on his face and it was dripping from his cheek or whatever, and essentially alluded to the fact that he was sexually assaulted and has, you know, malcontent and is looking to do something about it from his Facebook comment. That's what it seemed like. Anyway.
Yeah.
Then we find out that he had tried to reach out to number one fan. They were going to meet up. Plans ended up falling through. Kai spent some time at a diner, I think, took some pictures with the guys, then reached out to Joe because supposedly number one fan said that, you know, oh, you shouldn't be in Newark. Newark is a dangerous place. So Kai was like, oh, I'm kind of in that area, I think I'm in that area. So he reached back out to Joe. Joe's like, yeah, you know, I can host you again and you can come by.
But mind you, at least how I've understood this is after Kai is already saying that he had been sexually assaulted by this man.
Right, and supposedly, I think in one of the transcripts, it said that number one fan said that Kai told her that he was raped. Didn't give like a ton of information on it, but made that comment. And then I guess a bunch of other people were questioned to see if Kai ever made that comment to anybody else. And all the other people that he came in contact with throughout that night said that he never mentioned anything about it.
Yeah.
So after he is allegedly sexually assaulted, Kai, you know, looking for a place to stay, for some reason, willingly contacts this guy. Now looking back on it, knowing that he made this Facebook post, kind of saying like, hey, what would you do? And, you know what you would do. You would want to go after somebody that did something bad to you. Goes back to Joe's house and then ends up killing Joe. He says that he was drugged again, but what we find out as far as like injuries to Joe and all this stuff, it's like, no, this old man who was smaller in stature than Kai.
He was 74 years old. I believe he was 5'5" and a little bit over 200 pounds.
Yeah, so he was, you know, I think they made mention in the court documents that he was smaller in stature than Kai.
Yes.
He was like brutally beaten to death on the floor of his bedroom
Yeah, he had very severe injuries to his body. He had a broken neck. I think he had, broken ribs maybe?
His ear was almost ripped off.
Yeah, he had severe scrapes, cuts, bruises, abrasions all over his face and head. The injuries were brutal.
Right, and Kai essentially tried to say that all of the things that he did to Joe were in self-defense, but the injuries were not consistent with self-defense.
No.
Like, if you're trying to get away, you don't need to beat somebody to death to get away. You want to attack, be violent, just enough to be able to get out.
Yeah, to get away from the attack that is happening to you.
Right, this was, over the top, I'm trying to kill this person type damage.
Yeah, and in the documentary, they did mention a couple things about his injuries that had to do with the fact that maybe someone's foot or a shoe was used in the attack, like not physically with their hands. It was more so they were kicked in the head or stomped on. And there wasn't a lot elaborated on that. And then when we were looking through the court documents, we found that fan number one, Kim, had testified to say that she did not see any marks or bruises or cuts or scrapes or anything on Kai's hands or his face or anything like that. And then you start to find out once you're looking at the medical examiner's testimony and the attorney is asking these questions to say, could this injury have come from someone stomping on this person, someone kicking this person? And he's saying, yes, perhaps, I suppose that's possible.
Which I feel like should have been an objection. I don't know if you could object to that if this is an expert witness being the medical examiner, but like by asking somebody if this could have been done by a stomp and having the expert say yes, that makes the jury think, oh, this guy was stomped.
Well, so that's a part of his appeal.
Right. So we get into the whole appeal later. So that's kind of the grounds of they built the case on Kai. They knew that, Kai came forward and said that, oh, he was sexually assaulted. Oh, and something I just also remembered was he told Kai, that is, he told fan number one that he tried to report the sexual assault to police, but they didn't want to listen to it because the guy that sexually assaulted him was a lawyer. Turns out later, that was fabricated. He never went to the police. I guess they checked in with whatever local agency he would have went to or whatever, and he never went and tried to report it there. So
yeah, but there were more things that tied him there.
Right.
He had the train ticket. He said he was there. And, a lot of stuff stemmed around the fact that he cut his hair, that he was leaving the state, that it seemed as though he was fleeing after this crime took place. And there were supposedly text messages and calls between Kai and Galfy. It wasn't just the fact that, like, oh, he was just seen on surveillance footage with him.
Right.
So they were able to essentially place him there, is how I understand it. And at the end of the day, even though Kai is saying that this happened in self-defense, he's saying it happened.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest thing to say. How did they tie him to this?
He admitted that he was there and did it.
So
but based
the
on the
reason
injuries
behind it is self-defense on Kai's part is what he's saying versus what the state is saying is murder one, that it was premeditated.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference in what they're saying took place here.
Yeah, and I think that something that probably helped convince them to go for murder one was that one comment that I don't know if it was substantiated in the court documents. I didn't see mention of it, but there was mention in the documentary that Kai was found with flyers of pedophiles.
Yes, I do remember that.
And they were like, oh, was he going after Joe because he thought Joe was a pedophile? And then now that I'm piecing that together with, there was a comment where Kai had made mention that, there was a young man that used to live with Joe and they should go look into that. It's like, oh, maybe, he made up this story about the sexual assault and then just thought Joe was a pedophile and went after him. Or I don't know. That's kind of up for interpretation.
Yeah.
But it shows like, why would you have these photographs of these pedophiles and then all of a sudden you're tied to a murder? Like, did you plan to go and murder this guy thinking that he was a pedophile?
Yeah.
So I think that they had a solid case. He admitted to doing it. All they had to prove is that it wasn't in self-defense. And I think on a super basic level, the injuries that Joe sustained during the assault prove that it wasn't self-defense.
That's the biggest thing, I think, with this case is just showing how brutal the beating he inflicted on Joe was. Just showed he wasn't just trying to get away, that it seemed as though he was doing this to end his
Cause
life.
death or serious bodily injury.
Yes. And I think that's exactly what they say in the court documents.
Yeah. And then there was a portion of one of the appeals that I was going through, and I found a piece of information that I think kind of encapsulates, how the trial probably went, but also why Kai's multiple appeals have not been approved. And I think that by reading through this, it kind of gives a little bit more information straight from the courts as to what happened and why Kai is still in prison today. So I'll just read a couple paragraphs here. It's from the State of New Jersey versus Caleb L. McGilvery on law.justia.com. So it says, quote, "In denying defendant's application, the judge noted the overwhelming proofs that defendant caused the victim's death, satisfying the first element necessary for first-degree murder. The extent of the injuries established by the medical examiner's testimony and corroborated by autopsy photographs and other medical records included a broken neck, broken ribs, and the mauling of his head to the point where his ear was torn, the cartilage visible. The judge opined the injuries demonstrated that the assault was far more than just an effort to thwart a sexual advance. Moreover, defendant's conduct following the attack, including his change of clothing and hairstyle, and his remarkable memory to extraordinary details, demonstrated that defendant was not believable. Despite remembering everything regarding his first meeting with Galfi and the topics of their conversation, he could not remember the whereabouts of his stained clothing. Defendant discarded his phone and falsely told Conley Burns that he had reported the alleged assault to police. He left New Jersey and was on his way to Georgia. Thus, no manifest denial of justice under the law occurred, much less one that required a new trial. The judge's decision was sound, supported by the record, and not a clear abuse of discretion. The medical examiner testified that Galfi died from blunt force trauma from many blows over his body, including to his eyes, mouth, ears, the back of his head, his neck, his shoulders, arms, and ribs. Blood spatters in the bedroom surrounded the victim. Galfi was a 74-year-old man, smaller in stature than defendant, and the severity and number of his injuries supported the jury's conclusion that defendant knew his actions created substantial risk of death, or that he was aware that death was practically certain to result. The repeated crushing blows demonstrated defendant's intent to cause serious bodily injury." End quote. That was long, but it paints a picture of what happened that second night that Kai stayed with Joe.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, there's a lot more. Obviously, we'll have a link to all of those documents, at least for the appeal, because I couldn't find the original court documents online. If anybody can, that'd be awesome. But we will have a link to that on our website if you wanted to take a look at it and kind of read through everything. If you are the type to want to deep dive after listening to us ramble on about something. But I did want to mention too, because I thought this was really, really odd. Kai's trial didn't take place until 2019. So he was arrested in May of 2013, and his trial did not begin until April 1st of 2019. So that's almost 6 years. So John and I were like kind of chatting about it before we started recording this, and it's like, did he not request a speedy trial? Did he not know that he could request a speedy trial? What was the reasoning for it to take so long? And, we've kind of been trying to find exactly the reason behind that. And I feel like a lot of the articles that I've found in regards to that are really vague. And
I think it's difficult to really get to the good articles that'll have the information that you want, because this documentary came out, and every time you're trying to search it, unless you are super specific, you're probably not going to be able to find it.
That was the problem I was having.
Yeah. But what I think some of the factors could have been where maybe he was going through like competency hearings. Maybe they wanted to make sure.
That was happening because he did end up diagnosed, from what I understand, with 2 separate mental health disorders.
Right. Because I think right after he was arrested, or was it right after he was convicted, he attempted suicide?
No, it was 2 months after he was arrested. So he was arrested in May, and then in July of 2013, he attempted suicide while he was in prison. And it's unclear exactly what his injuries were, but he was brought in to a hospital, and he was in stable condition. So
I think there could have been a lot of medical-related hearings to see if he was competent to stand trial, stuff like that.
Yeah.
If he didn't ask for a speedy trial or request a speedy trial, maybe they were just taking their time because they really wanted this to be super buttoned up, and without a doubt, like, they didn't want outside interference from his virality from the internet to taint the jury's opinion on things.
Yeah.
So maybe they wanted to make it totally locked tight before they presented it to the jury and prove that without a shred of a doubt, Kai was the one who committed the murder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think there could have been a lot of things that went in play there that lengthened that up. I mean, a lot of times things don't go to court for an extended period of time to begin with. It's usually true. Like these, I guess this would kind of fall into that category, but a lot of these like very public and socially driven cases where, you know, it's all over social media, it's all over the internet, people are clamoring to want to know what happened. A lot of those I feel like get pushed, you know, to the forefront and maybe move faster. But with all the underlying factors of, you know, Kai's mental health and everything that they found throughout the course of the investigation, a lot of that could play part into why it was delayed so long.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, on one side, I guess it doesn't really matter how long it took to get to his trial because time served was applied to the 57-year sentence.
This is true.
So he still has, you know, however many years to go from here.
Yeah, I don't think he's eligible for parole until like 2060, 2050 something like that.
Yeah, and I remember reading a comment from the judge, and during the sentencing, he said something to the effect of, by the time you get out of prison, you'll still be younger than the guy you murdered. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oof. And I also find it a little bit weird that he only got 57 years.
I agree.
I would have to look at the sentencing in New Jersey, but like...
For murder one?
I mean, it's murder one of...
Was he convicted of murder one, though, or did they find him guilty of, like, second degree?
I think he was found guilty of murder one, and it was, you know, a person over the age of 65.
Yeah.
So you would think that might be, you know, some type of added penalty.
Or cause for a harsher sentence, like when you have, like, a habitual offender or something, and you give him a harsher sentence.
Right.
Like...
Or, like, when something's deemed a hate crime, you can add... It's like, it's added on the back half. Like, they have to prove that this crime occurred, and then once you want to bring forward the evidence of the hate crime, it's used to kind of amplify the sentence.
Makes sense.
But I guess that's kind of where we can end it. I mean, if you wanted to talk more about this, we'll post, obviously, stuff about the episode on our socials. And
yeah, we'll post a few things. Just
our ratings.
Obviously, yeah, our ratings. A couple pictures, you know, so you guys can get a good idea of, you know, what these people looked like if you haven't seen the documentary. Also, you know, I always wonder... when people listen to these episodes, did you watch the documentary already and you want to know what other people think about it and if they agree with you? Or are you listening to this before you watch the documentary because you want to know what we think and if you think it will be something, well worth your time to watch? So I'm curious to know what you guys think if you've seen it or if you're going to watch it. And if you do end up watching it, come back to us after and let us know your thoughts.
Yes, and I would say on that note, don't take our poor ratings as a reason not to watch it if you're interested in this genre. Obviously you are because you're listening to the podcast, but if you have, you know, an hour and a half to blow, it's worth watching to get you thinking, and it's an interesting conversation to have with somebody that's also watched it and just kind of see, you know, do your opinions on things align with ours in this case?
Yeah, and I was even talking to John's sister about this earlier today, and we were just chatting about it. So, you know, it's one of those things, like, as much as it's not our favorite documentary we've ever seen, it does create a dialogue and it creates a conversation. And maybe it's not just this case. Maybe it'll create, you know, more of a conversation in future cases that we do. Yeah,
and I think the conversations can be very varied that come from this.
Absolutely.
Because you can have one conversation about how blind most of the characters that are in this story appeared to Kai's mental health.
Yeah.
You can have a conversation about how mental health needs aren't really met with the type of aid that they need to be. And this guy was on front and center on the internet, and people still didn't care enough to, you know, get him the help that he needed. And then what type of things happen after signs and symptoms go untreated or unaddressed, what can happen after the fact. So it's like,
there are so many different avenues you can go down with what you stick on in this. And, you know, obviously for me, I really stuck on the second half of things when we were talking about Joe Galfi and his case, and I wanted to know more about that, but maybe somebody else is more enamored and more interested in just how people go viral in general. And maybe that's something that really fascinates you. And, you know, if that's the case too, I think this would be something that you should take your time to watch, because it's all a learning experience. You know, I learned things in this documentary that could potentially help me as I'm navigating future unsolved cases. And maybe there are things that might stick out to me
Because you watch this.
Exactly. And I might say, maybe this is someone who has suffered PTSD or has suffered childhood trauma, and maybe that's why this crime is happening in this way. And, even though it's not a 10 out of 10 for us, I think it still was beneficial to watch because we learn things and we can apply them in the future.
Yes, and I think after talking about it like that, maybe I'll give it a solid 4. Because I was on the 3.
You already gave it a solid 4.
No. I was on the cusp of a 3.5 and 4.
Yeah, but you said earlier you were giving it a 4.
Yes, I know.
You definitively said a 4.
I know, but now I am more steadfast in my opinion in doing the 4 and not a 3.5.
John's wishy-washy, everyone.
No, it's just because there is good that comes out of watching this, because you can get on those types of conversations from it. They didn't tell the story in a great way, but it still brings up interesting topics to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think this is our second review of a piece of media or multiple pieces of media.
Yep.
Obviously, if we were to continue to do this, we'll get better and better at it. I know it's a little bit rambly now, but just as it was when we started off at the very beginning, episode 1, there are growing pains to things. But if you guys would like to have some varied content where, you have a couple unsolved cases, you have some type of media review, and then we have another thing kind of in the works that we'll be talking about later, but what other types of content would you like us to cover? Usually we kind of stay away from, what's in the news now, because we think it's important to not just regurgitate what everybody else is talking about, but to bring these unsolved cases to the forefront. Maybe some good can be done with them.
But I think doing something like this, where it's a documentary review or a TV show review or some other type of, not necessarily true crime, but crime in general, media, that keeps things varied and it keeps it,
fresh. It's not the same old all the time every week.
Yeah, I like to have a little bit of structure in my life, but I also like to have a little bit of surprise. So I'm sure everybody listening is going to be like, what? This is different.
Right.
But, we really want to know at the end of the day, we want to know what you guys want. We want to know what you guys want to hear, what you're interested in.
And I think that by doing reviews on content, it kind of gives you a light into who we are and what we think of things, more so than going through a case.
Yeah.
You can hear our opinion more.
Yeah.
Because whereas, some of our statements when we're talking about an unsolved case may give you a general idea, but we can talk more freely when it's, a piece of media that we're reviewing and talking about, and other people can also watch that same thing, formulate their own opinions, and then, they'll see how they agree or disagree with us on that. Whereas when it's a case that they have never heard of and the only information they're getting is the information we're providing them, it's like they can't be like, oh, no, well, I don't think that way. I remember hearing this from somebody else and it made me think this way. So it gives you a little bit more of a close look into who we are as people, I guess.
And speaking of, we should hopefully have our Q&A out soon. Life got in the way with that. So hopefully you guys will be seeing that in the next couple weeks. But
yeah, and seeing how we still have a couple weeks to put that together. If you have any questions, I'm sure Brittany will put out on social media a couple more Q&A.
Yeah, speaking of, really quick, social media in general, if you want to follow us, you can find us on Twitter at Wicked Deeds. We are Wicked Deeds Podcast on Facebook and Wicked Deeds Pod on Instagram. And we're way more active on there with responding to people and, comments and DMs and stuff like that. So if you guys want to get in touch with us easier, I would say email or social media are the 2 best ways if you want to leave a comment or something. And also, I just wanted to ask our lovely, wonderful new listeners, because we have gotten so many new people over the past month and a half. So first of all, welcome. I know this is the end of the episode and I'm welcoming you here, but thank you so much for subscribing and sticking with us. And, we just are hoping that our new listeners would be willing to leave us a 5-star review on whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, another platform that allows you to leave a review. But, the more reviews that you get, the more eyes that see you, the more we'll be able to continue producing this level of content and hopefully more content. So, it's just our ask of our listeners, if you wouldn't mind leaving a 5-star review on some platform.
Yeah, I think the more that we grow, the closer we are to being able to provide more content and to create a community where, you can have direct access to talking to us. And
yeah, absolutely.
Have some type of input on the content that we create.
Definitely.
Yeah, so with all that being said, leave a comment, leave a review, reach out to us by email, whatever. And you can tune in next Tuesday and we'll be back with another unsolved case.
Yes, we will. See you then.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.